Hello Year 8s, this is the second video for week 6, Year 8 Biology, and this is all on the topic variation, page 32-33 in your textbook. Now, if you have a female horse and a male donkey breeding together, they will produce a mule. Now the mule will be sterile. It will not be able to have offspring itself. The same thing would happen if you had a male horse and a female donkey. So what we need to do is we need to try and understand these ideas. Even though they have similar features, it'd be easy to think that they are variations of a single species, but horses and donkeys are different species. We'll be talking about the word species later in the video. And let's talk first of all about variation. Now, variation exists from daisies to giraffes. Now, the wide range of different living organisms that do exist is called biodiversity. Now, I hope you are able to remember part of your Year 7, where you learn all organisms can be classified into smaller and smaller groups based on observable features. Now, if you have a look at the features of the plant, animals, fungi, bacteria, and prototists in this picture here, you'll notice a wide variety of features. And there's a wide range of variation, and much of that variation is due to inherited factors. These are called genetic factors. But there is also environmental variation due to environmental factors. Let's say, for example, we looked at this animal over here. It's a walrus. Perhaps this is quite a large, rotund, fat walrus because it has plenty of food available. But environmental variation could exist where you could have a walrus not able to access food and shelter and whatever it needs to sustain its life, and it may be a lot thinner, a lot slimmer. Now that would be called environmental variation. So environmental variation is due to environmental factors such as the amount of food available, which would affect how large these animals or plants or organisms would grow. Let's move on to the next page here. So variation between organisms of the same species. And let's have a look at this picture over here. Now these are different breeds of dogs. Now, why do we group them as one species? Now, organisms that are very closely related are put into a small group called a species. Now, only organisms of the same species can successfully breed with each other and produce fertile offspring. So all these different breeds of dog, these are all belonging to the same species. You could breed any one of these dogs with another dog of the opposite sex, and that could come from a different breed within the dog species, and you could have offspring with mixed characteristics that will then be able to have offspring themselves, puppies themselves. So it is because there is variation between organisms that we can classify them into groups. This group on the right hand side is dog, and these are all belonging to the same species, the dog species. And only organisms of the same species can successfully breed with each other and produce fertile offspring. So the tall big dog at the back could be bred with any of the dogs that you have below it, and the offspring, the puppies, would be able to have puppies themselves. So domesticated dogs are all members of the same species. We give them a Latin name. The Latin name for domesticated dogs is Canis familiaris. But as you can see, there is wide variation between the different breeds. However, they can all interbreed to produce fertile offspring. Species are named in a particular way, referred to as the scientific name or the Latin name, so we can recognise the names all over the world. The species names has two parts. The first part is called the genus, and the second part is called the species. So here, the genus is Canis, and the second part, Familiaris, is the species. Now, I'm going to move on to showing you another example. Stoats and weasels. So here's a picture of a stoat, and here is a photo of a weasel. And they look similar, don't they? Well, stoats and weasels have many similarities, so they are both in the genus Mustela. However, they cannot interbreed. You cannot get a daddy weasel and a mummy stoat, or a mummy weasel and a daddy stoat, to give babies that will then be able to give babies themselves. So we don't really use the word babies when we're talking. We use the more formal word offspring. But that's pretty much what it means. So they cannot interbreed, so they must be a different species. The main differences are that a stoat is slightly bigger than a weasel and has a black tip to its tail. The weasel's scientific name is Mustela nivalis, and the stoat's name is Mustela ermine. So, and to now look at some of the website information from BBC Bitesize to help us with this. I will leave the links in the guidance. So, just to recap, what is variation? Now, all people are humans, they belong to the same species. Your friends and classmates may have different eye colour and hair colour to you. Some will be boys, some will be girls, some are tall, some are short. The presence of these differences between living things of the same species is called variation. Remember, species? A type of organism that is the basic unit of classification. Individuals of different species are not able to interbreed successfully. Variation is the difference between individuals' distance from the norm. Variation between different species is usually greater than the variation within species. Some variation within species is inherited, and some variation is due to the environment. Variation in a characteristic that is a result of genetic information from the parents is called inherited variation. And this is the reason why you look a little like your father and a little like your mother. So your natural father and your natural father. But you're not identical to either of your parents. This is the reason why, is because you get half of your DNA and inherited features from each parent. Each egg cell and each sperm cell contain half of the genetic information needed for an individual. So 9 months before you were born, when you were an egg cell and a sperm cell, you joined up at fertilization and a new cell was formed. Your first cell was formed with all the genetic information needed for you as an individual. Now, some examples of inherited variation in you include your eye colour, hair colour, your skin colour, whether you have lobed or lobeless ears, those round wiggly bits at the bottom of your ears, and your ability to roll your tongue. Can you roll your tongue in a U shape? Some people can, others can't. Why don't you find out whether people in your family can roll their tongue? Blue eyes, brown eyes, green eyes, these are all examples of inherited variation. Do you have these little wobbly bits at the bottom of your ears? They're called lobes. Do you have a lobed ear? Do you have a lobeless ear? That's inherited variation. Do your natural parents have lobes to their ears? Your gender is inherited variation too, because whether you're a male or whether you're a female, that's a result of the genes you inherited from your parents. Environmental causes of variation, however, exist. Maybe you've spent a long time in the sun. It's a very hot climate in the Middle East. In the UAE, we have year-round sunshine. So, as a result, you could have a darker skin tone. But if you were then to journey to a place where it is a lot lighter and the sunlight is less intense, your skin colour would become fairer. So that is an environmental cause of variation. Your diet as well, whether you've had an accident and you have a scar, the culture that we have, the lifestyle that we enjoy in the UAE. So we could become heavier if we eat too much food. We'll become lighter if we eat too little. A plant in the shade of a big tree will grow taller as it tries to reach more light. All of these are environmental variations. Here's some other examples of features that show environmental variation. The language that we speak, our religions, flower colours in hydrangea. These are plants produce blue flowers in acidic soil and pink flowers in alkaline soil. Now, some features vary because of a mixture of inherited causes and environmental causes. For example, you could have two identical twins. They could inherit exactly the same features from their parents. However, if you take a pair of twins and twin A is given more to eat than twin B, twin A is likely to end up heavier. So weight and height are very common examples of characteristics that are influenced by both genetic and environmental factors. So, I'm now going to talk to you about something that is slightly harder, a concept called continuous and discontinuous variation. So some features in organisms in a species show continuous variation and others show discontinuous variation. Now, human height is an example of continuous variation. We have the shortest person in the world and we have the tallest person in the world, and your height is possible within these two extremes. Weight is also an example of continuous variation. So continuous means that you can actually have a whole range. Variation that shows a wide range of intermediate values between two extremes, and they can be measured. So a wide range could exist. And you could be anywhere on this height axis. We have the number of people in this survey, in this category, and you could be anywhere here. The shortest person in the world would be here, the tallest person in the world would be here. That was a histogram to represent variation in height. But the more people that you would measure the height of, the more bars you find you would need until eventually you have a series of plots that would fit somewhere on this curve. And then you would just draw the curve. The closer the results, with the more people you have, the closer the results will be to the curved line. So this shape of graph is typical of a feature with continuous variation. Weight would also give a graph similar in shape to this. Let's have a look at discontinuous variation. Now, discontinuous variation comes about when you have a characteristic with only a limited number of possible values. So there are 4 blood groups. You can't have a mix of A and O. You're either A, B, AB, or O. Those are your different blood groups. Discontinuous variation is the differences between individuals in a characteristic that can only be put into different categories. Another example of discontinuous variation is what sex you are when you are born, male or female. Another one could be eye colour. So, that concludes continuous and discontinuous variation. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you about variation, genetic variation. So, remember we were talking about dogs? Extensive genetic variation is usually found within any species. It's clearly visible in the domestic dog species. So I'm going to introduce to you 2 terms. Variation within genes leads to different genotypes, and this can be seen by the individuals having different phenotypes. A genotype is quite an advanced idea. It is an extension. It talks about the alleles that an organism has for a particular characteristic, usually written as letters, and you learn about those letters at GCSE. Phenotypes, however, is what you see. So we see a very short dog on the right hand side here. We see a very tall dog on the left hand side here. So the phenotype for these 2 dogs is short and tall. We see that this dog in the middle has golden fur. This dog next to it has black fur and it's curly. So the phenotypes would be black curly fur, golden straight fur. The phenotype is the visible characteristic of an organism which occurs as a result of its genes. So scientists are led to believe that all genetic variants arise from mutations, and most have no effect on the phenotype. This section over here is an optional extension. You may pause the screen to read this. It's a stretch and challenge. I'm now going to go through how variation and inheritance are linked together. So characteristics such as eye colour, height and body mass differ between individuals in a population. We've talked about that being variation. We've talked about that being perhaps an example of genetic variation, environmental variation, or even a mixture of both. A particular version of a characteristic seen in an individual is described as its phenotype. We've got 3 flowers here, so the colour is actually the phenotype of these flowers. These are snapdragon flowers. The colour is determined by the genes on the chromosomes these flowers have inherited from their parents. Another characteristic, which is height, could reveal phenotypes. So this could be a height phenotype. There's me in the middle, looks like that. But remember also that we could also have environmental factors that influence height. So it's an environmental variation and also a genetic variation. And that pretty much concludes everything that we need to cover. Thank you very much for watching. Remember, you can pause the video at any moment. I'm going to leave you with some information that is really, really extension information. So, before we do this, remember we talked about blood groups and discrete variation. And we talked about continuous variation. Please make sure that you understand both of those points. And I'm going to leave you with this information on the screen. This is completely extension and optional, so you may pause the video, have a look at that. And this talks about how we get genotypes and phenotypes. So you can pause again, read through that. Links very clearly to our studies of DNA. Again, more extension. It's completely optional to stretch and challenge you. Okay? Right, thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. And what I will do is I will set you some questions now for you to answer in a quiz. Take care, stay at home, stay safe, bye.